Good morning, folks. I am coming to you live from somewhat fancier settings than usual. This behind me is the presidential conference room here on campus at Chalfont Hall, because the KLI building is out of commission at the moment due to power being out to the building. I have gotten permission to use some unusual spaces to do some lecture recording for today. So I am recording your lesson on the autonomic nervous system for your future consumption. So let's get down to business here and get that recorded for you. So the autonomic nervous system, sometimes called the visceral motor division, we've talked about this a little bit in passing as part of other discussions we've had, is the division of the nervous system that is maintaining all of the background activities of your body. And it is arguably the busiest part of your nervous system because it is handling all of the background stuff that is keeping you alive from moment to moment without you having to think about it, and all of those housekeeping sort of systems that are necessary for your moment-to-moment survival. It maintains homeostasis in your body by controlling your glands, your smooth muscle, and your cardiac muscle. In other words, all of the unconscious parts of your body that you don't have to think about, that you can't think about in a lot of respects, and that you have no conscious control over. It regulates all of those basic fundamental activities that are required for the maintenance of the body, things like body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, digestion of food, production of wastes, metabolic rates, regulating the tiny muscles of the eyes and the inner ear, regulating the production of hormones and other bodily secretions, managing the immune system, managing all of the small internal functions of the body that you basically have no awareness of that are going on all the time. The autonomic nervous system is completely involuntary. There are technically techniques known as biofeedback techniques, whereby it is possible for some people to learn a limited ability to gain conscious control over certain autonomic responses, primarily consciously exerting some control over the heart rate. But for the most part, you're never going to be aware of autonomic functions. You're not going to have any ability to control them. You're not going to have any conscious awareness of them. And that's a good thing, because let's think about it. You're not going to be able to function if you have to think about, all right, how to power your digestive system all the time, and when it is and isn't necessary to secrete specific hormones, and how to make your kidneys go, and knowing what your spleen is up to at every moment, and so forth. So most of these effectors are just going in the background without you even getting any conscious sensory awareness of what they're doing, and they act without you having direct influence over them. The autonomic nervous system is going with basically just a lot of the effectors doing their own thing. Many of them actually even act without direct autonomic control. And the autonomic nervous system just does fine-tuning adjustments to environmental changes as needed. A lot of the effectors in your body are able to self-regulate without the autonomic nervous system even stepping in. And then the ANS is going to basically make spot adjustments as needed. For example, your heart sets its own pulse for the most part, and the ANS is just going to make necessary adjustments to raise or lower it in response to specific circumstances. By the way, for the purposes of this lesson, you might want to be following along with the handout that I have on Blackboard called Autonomic Nervous System. Since I don't have a whiteboard to work with, this room is quite lovely and charming to be working in, but it lacks whiteboard capabilities. So I don't have a board to be scribbling on. So you might want to have the ANS handout handy so that you have the spellings of terminology and so forth in front of you. Now, you already know that broadly speaking, the autonomic nervous system, this is the visceral motor division, of the nervous system. And you might recall from our discussion of the nervous system earlier this semester that that means it has two important subdivisions, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division is, you might recall, mostly going to be stimulating the body to action. It is preparing you to act in response to circumstances that demand action. It is activated by danger, by stress, by anger, by fear, by excitement, by competition, by sexual arousal. All of these things will activate sympathetic responses. The sympathetic division is, broadly speaking, going to be stimulating things in the body. It increases your alertness, raises your heart rate, increases your respiratory rate, elevates your blood pressure, raises your blood glucose levels. It is going to increase blood supply to the hearts, the muscles, skeletal muscles specifically, the brain, and the lungs. Basically, getting you ready for action. But part of that is that if you're prioritizing resource flow to the action parts, you have to deprioritize it elsewhere. Your body does not have enough blood and enough resources to power every system full tilt at all times. So when you're increasing blood flow to lungs, heart, and skeletal muscles, you're reducing it elsewhere. And specifically, the sympathetic division, although it is stimulating all the things I just talked about, it is reducing blood flow and resource flow to the skin, to the digestive tract, and to the urinary system. Those things are deprioritized during the sympathetic response. Now, the other division, of course, is the parasympathetic division, which you might recall of sympathetic, we call it fight or flight. Parasympathetic, we sometimes call it rest and digest, because it is, for the most part, the cool down system of the body. It is calming down most bodily systems. It is reducing energy expenditure, lowering systemic blood pressure, reducing heart rate, reducing respiratory rate, calming down bodily systems. But it's also stimulating certain things. Whenever the body is in cool down mode, what it's doing is it's stimulating background activities. It's allowing the body to prioritize resources for, you might say, housekeeping activities. When you're in parasympathetic mode, we are going to be prioritizing resources for healing, for growth, for immune system activity. We're going to be routing blood flow away from the lungs, the hearts, and the skeletal muscles. We're routing it towards the digestive system, the lymphatic system, the urinary system, the background housekeeping organs that are doing bodily maintenance and prioritizing resource acquisition, waste removal, and upkeep of the body. Now, it should be understood that the neurons that control the autonomic nervous system are going to the same structures. And it's not like your body is in either sympathetic mode or parasympathetic mode. There's not a hard toggle switch between one or the other. To some extent, both divisions are always active. There's what we call autonomic tone, which is the degree to which sympathetic and parasympathetic stimulus are going on. There's a seesaw balance between the two. And some structures in your body will be receiving parasympathetic stimulus more, some will be receiving sympathetic stimulus more at any given moment in time, depending on what is happening to you. So again, it's not a hard switch where your body's only sympathetic or only parasympathetic. It all depends on what's going on. Now, in the autonomic nervous system, The pathways there, the nerve pathways, feature two neurons between the brain and the effector carrying out the instruction. Autonomic nervous system is largely regulated by what we call control nuclei, masses of gray matter that are found in either the hypothalamus of the brain or in structures in the brainstem. Those control nuclei first transmit signals to a preganglionic neuron. The preganglionic neuron will use ACH as its neurotransmitter. And that preganglionic neuron will travel from its origin points in the control nucleus to either the brainstem or the spinal cord. The nerve fiber is the preganglionic fiber. That preganglionic fiber will terminate at what we call an autonomic ganglion, a cluster of neurons in either the brainstem or the spinal cord. The autonomic ganglion will then have a synapse, an interface with the second neuron in the pathway, which is the postganglionic neuron. Depending on where we're going, the postganglionic neuron will use either ACH or norepinephrine, one of our adrenaline hormones, as the neurotransmitter. It will give off a postganglionic fiber, a nerve axon, which will travel to the effector, the structure that carries out the command. And remember, our effectors are going to be either glands or muscles. So really only two neurons lie between your brain and whatever autonomic structure is carrying out the instruction, no matter how far away in the body that might be. So let's take a look at the sympathetic division first. Sympathetic division is sometimes called the thoracolumbar division, and we call it that because the neurons that control it originate from either the thoracic or lumbar divisions of the spinal cord. Sympathetic division is characterized by having short preganglionic nerve fibers and long postganglionic nerve fibers that stretch out very far in the body. The preganglionic nerve fibers exit the spine via the spinal nerves T1 through L2, which we're going to talk more about when we talk about the spinal cord coming up. And those spinal nerves travel to a chain of ganglia, called the sympathetic chain. And the sympathetic chain is a line of ganglia. Remember, ganglia are clusters of neurons found on either side of the vertebral column. So it's this long chain of ganglia linked up to each other, found to either side of the spinal column. The sympathetic chain in most people includes 3 ganglia in the cervical region, 11 ganglia in the thoracic region, 4 ganglia in the lumbar region, 4 in the sacral region, and 1 in the coccygeal region. Now, some of our preganglionic nerve fibers end at the sympathetic ganglia. Some of them go down the length of the sympathetic chain, linking those ganglia to each other. Some of them just keep on going. Some of them bypass the sympathetic chain altogether and continue out into the body, forming what are known as splanchnic nerves. That's S-P-L-A-N-C-H-N-I-C. Once again, having the handout handy for spellings is a good idea. Now, the postganglionic nerve fibers branch out from the ganglia of the sympathetic chain and spread out into the body. There are as many as 12 postganglionic nerve fibers for every preganglionic nerve fiber. And what that means in practical terms is that sympathetic responses have very widespread effects in the body. And you can see why that would be. Because when your body is going into sympathetic mode, when your body is going to have a sympathetic response, for the most part, the effects are going to be widespread. You're going to be activating lots of muscles at once to get your body ready for action. You're going to be stimulating blood flow all over the body. So it makes sense that you're going to have one little sympathetic nerve signal that goes out and then has lots of branches that go out to many, many different muscles at once. So it's not surprising that we have 12 postganglionic nerve fibers for every preganglionic nerve fiber that arrives at the sympathetic chain. So we can get that sympathetic signal going widespread in the body to lots of places at one time. Now, there are three routes by which nerve fibers leave the sympathetic chain. Three kinds of nerves that go out into the body to send sympathetic signals. First, we have so-called spinal nerves. Spinal nerves go to sweat glands, pillow erector muscles, the little tiny muscles that control the hairs on your hair follicles, and the blood vessels associated with your skin and your skeletal muscles. So they're going to stimulate sweating. They're going to stimulate hairs standing on end when you're frightened or cold. And they're going to stimulate the blood vessels in the skin to withdraw more blood from the skin whenever you are in sympathetic mode. Remember, we want to keep blood away from the surface of the skin when you're in sympathetic mode, because when you're in action mode, that reduces the possibility of bleeding. And the spinal nerves are going to stimulate skeletal muscles, which are more important when you're in sympathetic mode. Secondly, we have so-called sympathetic nerves. Sympathetic nerves travel to various organs in the thoracic cavity, like the heart, the lungs, the thoracic cavity blood vessels, and the esophagus. They also form bundles of nerve fibers called plexi around the carotid arteries. Those plexi control sweat glands, nasal glands, produce mucus in the nasal cavities, and salivary glands in the mouth. Some of those nerve plexi also control the iris of the eye, affecting the dilation and constriction of your pupils. Some sympathetic nerves also combine with parasympathetic fibers to form what are called the cardiac nerves, which travel to the hearts in order to control your heart rate. And finally, we have those splanchnic nerves that I mentioned. The splanchnic nerves bypass the sympathetic chain altogether, and they instead travel to a second set of ganglia called the collateral or prevertebral ganglia. Three of those, the so-called celiac ganglion and the superior and inferior mesenteric ganglia, are found around the abdominal aorta and form the abdominal aortic plexus, a bundle of nerve fibers that we often call the solar plexus. The solar plexus is located behind the stomach, right around the level of L1. So in your abdominal cavity, right about here. And anybody who has ever taken a whack right there knows that it's very uncomfortable, that it's a spot that will send a big nerve shock through your body. That'll cause you to evacuate your breath very painfully and kind of stun you for a moment, because that will stimulate all those nerves very forcefully. You know, if you get stimulated there by a sudden shock to or blow to that area. Those splanchnic nerves, for the most part, what they're doing is they're controlling sympathetic action in that region. Now, we can't talk about the sympathetic response without saying a few words about something we discussed the other day, and that is the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are, of course, crucial to the sympathetic response. Remember that the adrenal glands are actually two separate glands, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. The adrenal cortex is important to the sympathetic response because it's producing steroid hormones. And you might recall steroid hormones, the corticosteroids, are regulating our stress responses. The adrenal medulla is critical to the sympathetic response because technically the adrenal medulla, we call it a gland, but what it really is it is a sympathetic ganglion. It is the source of epinephrine and norepinephrine, the catecholamine hormones which initiate the sympathetic response to begin with. So really, really important to the sympathetic nervous system, the adrenal medulla. And remember, at the same time, makes a trace amount of dopamine as well, which is why even though we're frightened and angry and so forth, sometimes feels a little bit good at the same time. So that's the sympathetic response. Now, the parasympathetic response, the parasympathetic division is sometimes called the craniosacral division. And we call it that because the nerve fibers that control it arise from the brain and from the sacral region of the spine. They are going to have their preganglionic cell bodies located, actually, for the most part, in the brain, specifically in the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, or inside the spinal cord, in the region between S1 and S4. Remember, the spinal cord region, not in the actual spine region. Parasympathetic nerve fibers are characterized by having very long preganglionic fibers and very short postganglionic fibers. In other words, the nerve fibers that control parasympathetic responses stretch out very, very far in the body, and then the terminal ganglia are actually very close to the target effector. You have a lot less divergence and splitting of nerve fibers than in the sympathetic division. You only have two postganglionic fibers for every preganglionic fiber. The split occurs right before you reach the targeted effector. And the reason for that is quite simple, that in the sympathetic division, you're stimulating very large parts of the body at once. You're stimulating most of the body to act at one time, to engage lots of muscles and everything, to get the whole body ready for action. In the parasympathetic division, for the most part, you're having a very targeted and focused stimulus where you're not relaxing the entire body at once. You're relaxing specific regions, or then you're stimulating a specific organ or part of the body at once for housekeeping activities. So your parasympathetic signals are going to stretch out from the brain along a long preganglionic nerve fiber. Then you're going to have a ganglion located right by the target effector, and then you're going to have small nerve branches for the postganglionic fiber that go directly to that structure. Now, a lot of our parasympathetic signals are going to exit the brain along cranial nerves. We didn't say a lot about the cranial nerves in here. We talked a little bit about the cranial nerves, but didn't say too terribly much about them. And there are four specific cranial nerves that carry parasympathetic signals. There's cranial nerve 3. Cranial nerve 3 is the oculomotor nerve. It travels to the ciliary ganglion right behind the eyeball, and it controls movements of the eye. There's cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve. It travels to the sphenopalatine ganglion, located by the sphenoid bone and the palatine bone, as you might guess by the name, where it controls the lacrimal glands, that is the tear glands. and the salivary and mucus-producing glands associated with the nasal and oral cavities. It also has a branch that goes to the submandibular ganglion, the base of the mandible, where it controls the submandibular salivary glands to produce saliva. We have cranial nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is going to branch from the otic ganglion near the ears to form the tympanic nerve, which helps to control the movements of the eardrum. And last but not least, probably the most important nerve of the parasympathetic division is cranial nerve 10. Cranial nerve 10 is the vagus nerve, VAGUS, which gives off 90% of all parasympathetic nerve fibers. And cranial nerve 10, I don't know if you recall this, if I mentioned this, is the only cranial nerve that has extensive innervation below the neck. It extends down into the trunk of the body, and it produces several different bundles of nerve fibers. It branches off to form the cardiac plexus near the heart, the pulmonary plexi near the lungs, and the esophageal plexus, which near the esophagus, as you might guess. And all of those give off additional bundles of nerve fibers known as the vagal trunks. The vagal trunks then extends to innervate the liver, the pancreas, the stomach, the small intestines, the kidneys, the ureters, and the proximal portion of the colon. They're providing parasympathetic control to the vast majority of the digestive system, both its tubes and its glands. Those nerve plexi are also providing parasympathetic stimulus to the lungs and to the hearts to slow down respiratory rate and heart rate. Vast majority of the parasympathetic control for your internal visceral organs is coming off of the vagus nerve. Now, the parasympathetic control that is not coming from cranial nerves comes from the fibers branching away from S1 through S4 at the base of the spinal cord. And that is what we call the pelvic splanchnic nerves. Those pelvic splanchnic nerves lead to what is called the hypogastric plexus, a bundle of nerve fibers we call the hypogastric plexus, also known as the pelvic plexus. The hypogastric plexus gives off what we call the pelvic nerves. The pelvic nerves travel to the distal portion of the colon, the rectum, the urinary bladder, and the reproductive organs, and provide parasympathetic control of all those structures, helping to regulate things like urination, defecation, bowel movements, movement of materials through the colon, and actions of the reproductive tract, including the movement of sperm and eggs through the reproductive tract, and orgasm in both men and women. So all of that is parasympathetically controlled. Now, one special aspect of the parasympathetic nervous system that needs to be discussed is and this is a really interesting thing, is a subdivision of, well, not parasympathetic, it's both sympathetic and parasympathetic, I suppose, is a division of the autonomic nervous system called the enteric nervous system, or ENS. The enteric nervous system is a special network of neurons that is found throughout the walls of the digestive tract. It includes over 100 million neurons which is actually more neurons than the spinal cord itself. The enteric nervous system regulates the movements and secretions of the digestive tract. And so most digestive motility and secretion is controlled by the ENS. And what is really interesting about the ENS is that it does not originate from the brainstem, nor does it originate from the spinal cord. The ENS is detached from the central nervous system. And for the most part, it is auto-regulating. It pretty much controls itself without really any input from the brain or spinal cord. It does its own thing. Now, you saw from our previous discussion a few minutes ago that the autonomic nervous system has fibers that travel to the stomach and intestines and so forth and can influence them. But for the most parts, the ENS regulates the digestive tract all by itself. And the brain can step in and say, okay, we're going to affect this a little bit. But by and large, the ENS is independent of the central nervous system and regulates the digestive system on its own. Even if you are brain dead, the ENS will continue to process and regulate digestion of food. In fact, some neurologists have gone so far as to say that we have two nervous systems, to say that we have, you know, the main nervous system for controlling the body as a whole, the central and peripheral nervous system, and that then we have the enteric nervous system, which is its own thing, totally separate from the rest of the nervous system. And we do not yet fully know how that works. We don't know what regulates the ENS because it is largely self-regulating. And we have not yet figured it out because it doesn't have an equivalent of the brain. So we have not yet figured out how the ENS is controlled. It's pretty nifty. Now, it should be understood, thing to get about this. The sympathetic nervous system is going to be operating via norepinephrine. It uses norepinephrine as its neurotransmitter. The parasympathetic division uses acetylcholine, ACH, as its neurotransmitter. Now that's important. And it's important because norepinephrine has longer lasting effects. Adrenaline hormones, once released into the bloodstream, do not go away right away. You all know this. You all know that once you're angry, once you're frightened, once you're sexually aroused, you know, once you're excited, that feeling doesn't drop immediately. That feeling takes a little while to go away. Your heart keeps pumping for a while, you know, your breathing rate stays elevated a while. That energy doesn't diminish immediately. Parasympathetic sensation, the relaxed feeling, is easy to break. You can go from being relaxed to being energized and excited very swiftly. And that's because ACH has quick acting effects. ACH, the muscular neurotransmitter, is very quick to respond, very quick to fade. This is a very important adaptive response because we want parasympathetic effects to be quick to resolve and quick to go away, and we want sympathetic effects to be longer lasting. Why? It's a survival response. Because when you're in a danger mode, when your body is in danger mode, you have heightened awareness, you have heightened action. Your body is aware of the environment, you're ready to face danger, you're ready to face threats. Think about our ancestors. They were hunter-gatherers living in a dangerous world with wild animals and threats of all sorts. And it's like, okay, you face the danger, you face the threat, but are you sure that you're out of danger? Are you sure the threat is resolved? Your body keeps you in heightened awareness. Your body keeps you in heightened energy. Your body keeps the heightened glucose going, keeps the heightened oxygen levels coming in for a little while, keeps the heightened blood flow to the muscles for a little while, so that in case the danger isn't fully resolved yet, your body is still primed and ready for action for a little while, and you can jump back into action quickly. It's a survival instinct. It is an evolutionary mechanism to ensure that once danger mode is activated, danger mode stays activated for a little while. So even if you think the danger is over, if it turns out you were wrong, the body is still prepped and ready. It doesn't fade quickly. By contrast, parasympathetic mode, nice, calm, resting mode, has to be able to turn off quickly. Because when danger does happen, the body needs to be able to switch into action mode very, very fast. We need to be able to turn off parasympathetic rest mode very quickly so that you can move into action mode and respond to danger when danger arrives. If it took you several minutes to shift from parasympathetic to sympathetic, you would be dead before you could respond to danger. So the fact that we use a fast-acting neurotransmitter to respond for parasympathetic, one that adapts quickly, is good, because that means we can turn off parasympathetic mode fast and stop relaxing quickly and move into action mode quickly when we have to. And the fact that we have sympathetic mode that has a long-acting neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, means that once we're activated, we stay activated for a while. Make sense? I'm asking as if you're here. Now, both divisions of the nervous system, keep in mind, don't just think sympathetic excites things, parasympathetic calms things down. Both divisions can have stimulating or inhibiting effects depending on what we are doing. Remember that the sympathetic division is also inhibiting digestion. Remember that the parasympathetic division is also stimulating kidney function. So it all depends on what we're trying to accomplish. Most organs in your body receive both sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers. We call that dual innervation. Sometimes sympathetic and parasympathetic work together to achieve a common goal. That's cooperative effects. Salivation is like that. For example, when you're salivating, parasympathetic fibers are involved in releasing part of saliva. The mucus part of saliva is parasympathetic, but the liquid part of saliva is released sympathetically. So together they're achieving the full effect of salivation. Sometimes they work against each other to achieve a common effect. That's an antagonistic effect. For example, control of the pupil of your eyes. Dilating the pupils is relaxing them. That's parasympathetic. Constricting them is sympathetic. So adjusting your pupils to the exact level of light that is available is a combination of sympathetic and parasympathetic fibers working to achieve the right balance. Not all organs receive equal influence from each division. Some structures are parasympathetic only. For example, sweat glands. In that case, they can only be influenced by sympathetic control of other things like modifying blood pressure. A lot of what is done in our bodies, and keep this in mind, it's a very important thing you need to remember going into A&P2. A significant percentage of the change that is done in our bodies is achieved by changing where blood flow goes, routing blood from one organ to another according to where it is most needed, because the easiest way to achieve change in what a bodily system is doing is by changing how much blood it's receiving. If we give an organ more blood, we are by necessity giving it more oxygen, more glucose, more resources to work with. If we constrict the amount of blood getting into an organ, it has fewer resources. So a significant amount of parasympathetic and sympathetic control, what it's really doing is modifying blood vessels and therefore changing how much blood flow is getting to or from a given system. And we're going to talk a lot about that in A&P2 when we talk about the circulatory system and we discuss how the body regulates blood flow and how we constrict and dilate blood vessels to control how much blood is getting to and from a given organ. A significant amount of autonomic control is doing exactly that. But keep that in mind as a background thing. It should be pointed out that we're talking about the autonomic nervous system as its own division, but keep in mind it is not completely independent. The autonomic nervous system is getting input from the rest of the central nervous system. You may not be able to consciously think about autonomic control. You may not be able to say, okay, I want to route more blood to my skeletal muscles right now. You may not be able to say, I want to increase my heart rate or my breathing rate or whatever, but conscious thoughts and sensory data indirectly stimulate autonomic function. For example, you smell tasty food. And what does that do? That stimulates the autonomic nervous system to begin releasing saliva and making your mouth water. And it stimulates your stomach to begin releasing gastric juices in anticipation of a meal. So the conscious sensory inputs delivered an autonomic response. It triggered that. You experience sexual arousal in response to sexual thoughts, and that causes things to happen in your body that are autonomic things in response to thoughts of a sexual partner. You get angry because of something someone did. You're having conscious thoughts in response to something that makes you mad, and that stimulates a sympathetic response that makes the heart rate rise and makes the blood pressure rise and so forth. So the hypothalamus is receiving inputs from conscious thoughts and emotions, but then it's producing autonomic outputs. And you may not be consciously directing things like salivation or sweating or increased heart rates or salivation or whatever. But those things happen in response to sensory stimuli or emotional things you're feeling or thoughts that you are having. There's also an extent to which there is interplay between conscious action and autonomic action. There are some actions that are partially autonomic and partially conscious. Things that you can exert some control over, but not full control over. You have the ability, for example, to step in and control your breathing. You can choose to hold your breath for a little while. But eventually, the brain will say, you need to breathe, and will override holding your breath and force you to breathe. Your autonomic nervous system will send signals that make you aware of the need to urinate, the need to defecate. When you're a baby, those things will just happen on their own. When you're little, you learn to control your bladder and you learn to control your defecation reflex when you're very young, and you learn not to simply do those things whenever the signal arrives at the spinal cord. But there comes a point, even as an adult, when those signals override conscious control. Orgasm can be held back for a short time, but eventually it will override if stimulus continues, and it cannot be held back forever. Eventually, the autonomic nervous system will trigger it anyway. Part of swallowing is conscious. You initiate swallowing consciously, but then the upper part of the esophagus is skeletal muscle. The lower part of the esophagus is smooth muscle. So you start swallowing consciously, but you finish swallowing unconsciously. So certain aspects of our autonomic nervous system involve a partnership between conscious control and unconscious control, or there are certain activities we engage in where we start them consciously and finish them unconsciously, or there are things we have the ability to control for a time, but eventually autonomic control will override conscious control. All right. Okay, folks, that is what I have to say about the autonomic nervous system. So please take all this information into account. You will need this information for your final quiz. This is all going to be covered on the final quiz along with the spinal cord. So I will see you all in class on Monday. Take care.